What words come to mind when you think of Hollywood films? Action, excitement, sex, explosions,
Assemble.
words that might perhaps be less likely to come to mind? Stillness, silence, restraint, minimalism, boring. All of these, however, are characteristics of a movement in movies called slow cinema. Slow cinema has been gaining popularity over the past decade, initially outside the United States, but more and more even within somewhat mainstream films. All this immediately raises the question, why would anyone want to sit through movies that are about nothing?
The show is about nothing.
What's the appeal of 2 or 3 hours full of stillness and silence? It would seem like this is investing in little more than a cinematic sleeping pill. So, why the rising popularity? That is what we will explore in this video. We will look at how exactly to define slow cinema. And after the what of slow cinema, we'll turn to the why of slow cinema. What the heck is the appeal, and why are so many people making and presumably enjoying movies like this? The 2017 film A Ghost Story includes 2 scenes showing a woman, played by Rooney Mara, grieving after the death of her husband, played by Casey Affleck. The scenes consist of 2 unbroken shots of the woman eating pie as the ghost of her husband silently watches in the background. The first shot is 3 minutes and 37 seconds. The second shot, 4 minutes and 26 seconds. For context, the average shot length in movies today is around 2.5 seconds. Here, for nearly 500 seconds, the characters barely move. No speaking, no soundtrack, no camera motion whatsoever. We simply bear witness to 8 unbroken minutes of a woman expressing her grief through eating. So, how did a relatively mainstream movie with big-name celebrities like Casey Affleck, Rooney Mara, and Kesha come to have a scene like this? To answer that, let's rewind the clock just a bit. It's the mid-20th century. Hollywood films have taken over the world. We are in the era of stars and starlets, glitz and glamour, big cinema. Films like Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, and Wizard of Oz have swept the nation with the spectacle of it all. Movies are still a relatively young art form, and with the proliferation of sound and color, mainstream Hollywood films are pushing the medium to its limits. This is not, however, what all movies everywhere are doing. Some movies are pushing back against all this spectacle. Japan, 1947. Director Yasuhiro Ozu briefly puts the story on hold as the camera shows us a cat, and then holds on a teapot. No sound except the distant ringing of bells. It's showing things that are seemingly irrelevant to the story. Why are we looking at this teapot? It takes its time with the viewers, allowing us to sit and reflect on the imagery of the scene. There is no rush. Fast forward 2 years and travel 6,000 miles west to Italy. Here we have a movie from Vittorio De Sica that has moved away from the big adventurous plots of mainstream cinema. Instead, we follow a character for a day as he desperately searches for a stolen bicycle. A bicycle that his income and livelihood ultimately depend on. This is a slice of life film, a film that depicts the muted drama and stressors of the exploited working class. Movies like these laid the foundations for what would later become slow cinema. They challenged mainstream expectations of what movies could or should look like. And it is from this lineage that slow cinema is born. In the April 2010 issue of Sight and Sound, the journal's editor, Nick James, set in motion a polemic that was later referred to as the slow cinema debate. In his editorial piece, James outlined slow cinema as an act of passive aggression mounted against the Hollywood domination of the film industry. James identified a trend where films were using certain techniques, such as sluggish narrative pacing and minimalist aesthetics, that explicitly contrasted with the way most mainstream movies were made. James argued that these slow movies were simply a trend, and a rather shallow one at that. He wrote, "There are times, as you watch someone trudge up yet another woodland path, when you feel an implicit threat. Admit you're bored, and you're Philistine. Such films are passive-aggressive in that they demand great swaths of our precious time to achieve quite fleeting and slender aesthetic and political effects." James was, in short, skeptical of the artistic merit and political power of these films. Despite his criticisms, slow cinema as a movement was up and running. The term had been coined just in 2003 by French critic Michel Simen. It was then expanded in its theoretical applications with the release of an influential 2008 article from Michael Flanagan entitled "Towards an Aesthetic of Slow in Contemporary Cinema." By around 2010, slow cinema had matured into its own style of film, having established some of its exemplary filmmakers and defining characteristics. Today, slow cinema has begun to truly flourish, with it now being considered one of the most prominent production trends on the international film festival circuit, and increasingly affording attention by studies in film theory, history, and criticism. So, what makes this exciting new film style special? There are variations in how to define slow cinema. We can, nonetheless, capture some of the primary features that tend to crop up in most definitions. In order for a movie to fall under the umbrella of slow cinema, it will likely have an unhurried, even meandering pace, a narrative that might seem baffling or incomprehensible, prolonged moments of stillness, sometimes called temps mort or dead time, often through the use of long takes and delayed edits, an unusually still camera. And along with an unusually still camera comes unusually still characters, both in terms of movement and in terms of emotional range. The still camera will usually frame the still characters from long or medium shots, so not many close-ups. An austere or minimalist mise-en-scene, meaning everything that appears in the shot shuns elaborate or dynamic decor, lighting, or color. An unresolved storyline with themes that often deal with death and the passage of time. When a film adopts a handful of these characteristics, it will generally fall into the category of slow cinema. Of course, like any genre classification, films vary as to how much they adhere to such defining characteristics. Bela Tarr's films are sometimes considered the apotheosis of slow cinema, despite the fact that his camera almost never stops moving, although to be fair, it does move quite slowly. In contrast, the films of Swedish director Roy Andersson use almost entirely immobile camera work, though his mise-en-scene tends to be compositionally rich, and his narratives often have quite a bit going on, at least compared to Bela Tarr. Or, in the complete reverse of this, you might have a film like Birdman, filmed in the style of one single long take, a formal choice totally aligned with slow films, but with its frenetic narrative pacing, bright colors, dynamic music, and powerful performances, no one would consider Birdman to be a slow film. Regardless of how much these movies capture each and every criterion, the overarching sensibility of slow cinema is that of stillness. Which brings me to my next major question. It isn't just movies that are taking a turn for the slow. There seems to be a much larger cultural demand for things that take their time. There are movements in slow design, slow food, slow gardening, slow medicine, and slow sex. There is even a World Institute of Slowness based in Norway, and the Society for the Deceleration of Time in Austria, which once challenged Olympics organizers to award gold medals to athletes who had the slowest times. At the heart of all these movements and institutions is a desire to reclaim time, to resist the pressures of consumerism and neoliberal worship of stress and productivity, and escape the relentless psychic barrage wrought by marketing and social media and technology, to withdraw from the
Loud noises!
and simply exist. Slow cinema can offer this. Slow cinema can offer us the opportunity to breathe, to feel the gravity of the moment, the power of time. Perhaps most explicitly, we are able to contemplate. Filmmaker Paul Schrader says, "Watch an image long enough, and your mind goes to work." This can often lead to defamiliarization, where seemingly normal objects and images begin to feel new and different, as if we are seeing things for the first time. Slow cinema can offer this. While we may experience things with a renewed sense of wonder, it can also be existentially unsettling. After all, death and the absurdity of existence are prominent themes in slow films. Death is, after all, entangled with the passage of time, something that is viscerally felt during these films. Scenes like this one from Bellatar's 2010 film The Turin Horse force the viewer to watch leaves blow in the wind while a horse and carriage are framed in the distance. Within the story, insofar as there is a story in this movie, we are seeing a father and daughter attempting to escape a situation of poverty and starvation. As we sit and watch this unbroken shot for several minutes on end, our mind goes to work. The scenery is open to us, free for us to subjectively experience what we may. Scenes like this allow us to deploy what Bazan scholars called the democracy of the eye. Choose what you look at, and, more to the point, choose what you see. As we forcefully experience the passage of time, thoughts of death are common. Emily Dickinson wrote that it will never come again is what makes life so sweet. The knotted web of death and time is cast over our thoughts, and we are tasked with contemplating our true priorities. Time trudges along. We all die. What, then, matters to us? What are we to do with the time we have? The desire to break away from the toil of it all and more fully absorb the present moment also has its political implications. At the heart of slow cinematic style is a critique of globalization and capitalism. Yes, slowness affords the ability to defamiliarize the familiar, to absorb the passage of time, to contemplate mortality, and to gain perspective on what matters in life. Some scholars argue that slow cinema also affords us the ability to foster moral character and even practice a way of being in the world that can be essential for a functioning democracy. Philosopher Sylvian Agazinski links slowness not just to thinking or to pleasure and physical health, important though these things are, but principally to the survival of democracy. Democracy's survival requires, in her view, the citizenry's commitment to take one's time for the proper conduct of debates essential to democratic life. She writes, "Any public debate implies waiting periods, time lags, delays between speeches and responses. Slow cinema, then, is an artistic form that offers us the ability to cultivate these sensibilities. Sensibilities essential to becoming a more thoughtful and engaged participant in a world where all our decisions are saturated with political consequences. Slow cinema challenges the political order, visually and thematically criticizing the effects of late capitalism. Scholar Matthew Flanagan states that slow films turn their attention to marginal peoples, low-paid manual laborers, poor farmers, the unemployed and dispossessed, petty criminals and drug addicts, subsisting in remote or invisible places, and depict the performance of waged and unwaged agricultural and manufacturing work that is increasingly obscured by the macro volatility of finance capital's huge speculative flows. Slow cinema, then, can offer us the chance to practice skills essential to becoming a more engaged citizen while also immersing us in the realities of peoples affected by the current power structures. In their themes and their representations, slow cinema can be a particularly potent vehicle for empathy and understanding. They can embody the best of cinema, as expressed by critic Roger Ebert a few years before his death.
The purpose of civilization and growth is to be able to reach out and empathize a little bit with other people, find out what makes them tick, what they feel about, what they care about. And for me, the movies are like a machine that generates empathy. If it's a great movie, it lets you understand a little bit more about what it's like to be a different gender, a different race, a different age, a different economic class, a different nationality, different profession, different hopes, aspirations, dreams, and fears. It helps us to identify with the people who are sharing this journey with us. And that, to me, is the most noble thing that good movies can do, and it's a reason to encourage them and to support them and to go to them.
Now, do prolonged scenes of people trudging up hills and extended shots of driftwood floating in the ocean always offer such things? No, not necessarily. But if nothing else, slow cinema might just offer you the chance to take a nice little nap. Director Abbas Kiarostami wrote that, "You know how annoyed some directors get on finding out that someone has fallen asleep watching their film? I will not be annoyed at all. I can confidently say that you would not miss anything if you had a short nap. The important thing to me is how you feel once the film is finished, the relaxing feeling that you carry with you after the film ends." Slow cinema is not for everybody, and that is okay. The ability to sit and consume a film or any other form of media is a privilege that isn't afforded to everyone. That fact alone should challenge artistic gatekeeping or snobbery. Let people like what they like, especially since art is such a profound, even essential, path to a richly meaningful existence. That said, it is undeniable that slow cinema is up to something very different from most mainstream media. A slow cinematic aesthetic not only restores a sense of time and experience in a world short of both, it also encourages a mode of engagement with images and sounds, whereby slow time becomes a vehicle for introspection, reflection, and thinking, and the world is disclosed in its complexity, richness, and mystery. Slow cinema is artistically challenging, politically defiant, philosophically provocative, and, well, beautifully and spellbindingly boring.